understand that as much as it needs to be your organic conversation, it also needs to be beneficial. It needs to be informative. People need to learn from it, or at least to be engaged by it or entertained by it or something.
Kyle Golding, why don't you introduce yourself to the group?
Hi, everyone. Kyle Golding, CEO and Chief Strategic Idealist for the Golding Group. I'm co-host of the Strategic Growth Podcast with my business partner, Chris Pritchard, APR PRSA Fellow. It's our business podcast. I also have a personal podcast called the Saturday Morning Hustle. I come in the office every Saturday and get some extra work done. That started as a social media joke, really. Some social media posts on Saturday mornings about being in the office, drinking a lot of coffee, eating donuts, and hustle and grind. And has now developed into a full brand with 275 episodes of that podcast. I'm also the producer of the Oklahoma Venture Forum podcast. I'm on the board of directors for the Oklahoma Venture Forum and producer of the Project 3810 podcast, which is a business incubator that I'm also a part of.
Fantastic. Well, I think everybody can see we've got an awesome group and an awesome panel. So I want to get things started off and just kind of start with a little broad question, and then we'll kind of narrow in on some topics. But first of all, from each of your unique perspectives, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the trends that you're seeing in relation to podcasting? And Kyle, what about you, with especially on the entrepreneurial side and Saturday morning hustle? What do you see as far as trends go?
The worst trend is definitely celebrities getting into podcasting. The whole value, I think, to a lot of people is podcasting is giving a voice to people who normally wouldn't have that voice, or an opportunity to hear or speak with, or in a little bit of a two-way conversation with people you normally wouldn't get a chance to. Now that applies to celebrities too, but celebrities have platforms already. So for me, the more celebrities in the podcast game, the less I like real people communicating with each other for better reasons than being celebrities. But I think the best thing that's happening right now, because there are a lot of podcasts, tons and tons. The industry is now catching up with discoverability. Things like book club type scenarios for podcasts, where people are sharing recommendations and having conversations about podcasts. Booking services to book yourself as a guest or to have guests on your podcast. Everyone now having access to Zoom, like what we're doing here, made it easy for you to interview someone anywhere in the planet, much less, they don't have to be someone who can come down to your studio or to your local coffee shop. And even services like PR services, publicists, etc., that usually used to be for just film or books, are now specializing, not just they're able, but specializing in doing publicity for podcast hosts and the rise of podcasters as influencers. So I think those are the positives. So if we could just kick all the celebrities out and let real people talk to real people, I think we'd be better off.
I love it. Anyways, Kyle, what about you? Tell us about the uniqueness of the various podcasts you're on, and then maybe some tips for getting started.
Much like Kayla, I started doing the podcast not really having an outline of what it should look like. I just started doing it. It developed from social media posts and small videos, and so it was experimentation, kind of trial by fire at first to kind of figure those things out. But the main thing was, because of what I do, the day job, doing business development, entrepreneurism, things like that, I wanted to talk about those topics, but I didn't want it to be a college lecture. I didn't want it to be the kind of sort of talking head video that you can get, in a professional organization or in a college class. I wanted it to have a little bit more kind of on the street kind of advice for people. And then at the same time, it's trying to be motivational and positive, but without being like a cheerleader, without being those people that are super like, you can do it, because there's enough of that in the world as well. So I wanted to kind of blur the lines in between them. And what I ended up with is just sort of, I create an outline for the show. I have about 5 bullet points for each topic, and the shows range anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes. And so I try to give myself an outline of what I want to accomplish, but I try not to script very much, because I want it to flow and to feel like I'm talking to the person that's on the other end of the speaker. And the most common feedback I get from people who are fans of the show is that I break down complex business ideas in simple ways that people who aren't necessarily full-time business people can understand. So just my willingness to try something different and not be what was kind of already out there, and then just naturally delivering the way I just speak. I really feel like if you listen to my podcast, it's the same thing if we were sitting in the room together. I try to achieve that sort of connection with people, but also that's why I don't structure it too much. I understand I want to accomplish a few things, but I want the information to flow so that if I did run into you in the street, we went and got a cup of coffee or a beer somewhere, I would kind of tell you the same thing that you heard on the podcast. Because when it comes to the kind of the top things people need to think about when they start their podcast, you have to be authentic. Talk about things that you are actually a subject matter expert on, or you have authentic experience in. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to work at the top level of a business or a marketing or PR or whatever industry it is that you're in. But if you're a beginner, talk about it as a beginner and how you're learning through the process. And if you're someone in the middle of the process, explain like what you've learned and what you hope to learn. And then if you're someone like myself who's been an entrepreneur for 35 years, you could talk at that level, but understand what the audience needs to hear from you. So if you're authentic, and then if you're consistent, like Kayla said again, if you skip an episode, people will notice it. So if you can't do a weekly episode, don't start off doing a weekly episode. If you can do a monthly or bi-monthly, make that plan that you can fulfill. You can always do extras. I started a last Monday of the month series so that I have every Saturday on the Saturday Morning Hustle, but I do last Monday of the month series called the Balance Series, which is a completely different conversation because I wanted to be able to do more content, but not enough that I was going to change it from every single Saturday. Authenticity, consistency, and then understanding how your content is delivering to people, paying attention to what the audience, the things they rank high, the things that they rank low, the questions that they're asking. If they're asking a lot of the same questions or you're getting the same questions from the same amount of people, you're not explaining it well enough and you need to go deeper. Every episode I ask, like, what do you want me to talk about? And there's a lot of conversations where I'm like, this is what you guys said on Twitter. This is what you said on Facebook, or I keep getting asked this question. And so that's what we're going to talk about this week. So just paying attention to your audience like any good communicator would do.
Fantastic. Great. I get down one of those rabbit holes if I'm not careful. So let's talk a little bit about technology and just talk about the platforms that each of you use. A little bit, talk about like if someone's getting started with the podcast, maybe, and Carlie, you kind of referenced this here as you were wrapping up the question here, but talk about that technical plan maybe that somebody needs to have if they're going to start off. And Kyle, I think you're up in the rotation, so we'll have you go first on this particular question, and we'll get the technical stuff out of the way, and then we've got a couple of really fun questions up after this, so everybody be ready for those. But this is important too, because you can have the best podcast in the world, but if you don't have a plan to get it out, no one's going to hear it. So Kyle, why don't you talk to us about the technical planning that needs to go into the podcast?
There's a lot to understand. Everyone thinks, so the good and bad, the pro and con, the reason everyone's got a podcast is because the idea of, hit record and start talking and then post it. Simple enough to have a really good quality podcast. There's all the different things that we were saying about have a plan, have your checklist, have your technology needs. So the good news is you could start a podcast today with a free cell phone app, or you can invest in your own studio, or you can go and rent by the hour, etc. So there's all kinds of levels. I'm building this podcast studio for a client right now, like in their space. So there's all kinds of levels that you could address what your need is and the expectations that would come with how you produce a podcast. My recommendation to anyone listening to this right now is if you're not currently producing a podcast, you should be using the Anchor app. It's a free app. It's a smartphone app, and it's a web platform. It is free to use. It has great distribution to all the different platforms, Apple, Spotify, Google, all the rest. So it's free, easy to use. They have all kinds of production tools built in, and they continually add them and update them. They were recently purchased by Spotify, so it was a startup that did well enough to be purchased by Spotify. But the ability to, whether you record it on an external microphone or a laptop and then transfer the file, or literally record it on the app on your cell phone, either way, the ability to do one recording, add some bumper music, some special effects. You can even import music from Spotify, like legitimate artists, etc., and then hit one button and it goes to multiple distribution channels. I wished I'd had it when I got started. And my experimentation in podcasting, when I was transferring from just doing social media videos to podcasts, the Anchor app was the first app that was #1 free. At that time, it was called micro podcasting. It was only 5-minute platform because they were new, and that's all they could afford to host was 5-minute podcast. And I think it distributed to like 3 platforms at the time, and they've continued to expand and do better. So there are great tools, free and low cost, or you can invest hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think the thing is, it needs to be relevant to who you are and what you're doing. So obviously, if you're an individual who just has a passion for a subject, you want to communicate with people, don't spend too much money. Now, do spend time. And we've talked about preparation before. Be prepared. Understand that as much as it needs to be your organic conversation, it also needs to be beneficial. It needs to be informative. People need to learn from it, or at least to be engaged by it or entertained by it or something. So make sure that you're communicating in a way people like. Make sure that you're achieving a couple of goals, even if it's just some bullet points as you start talking. And then understand, the technology that can range from a simple free app all the way through the most sophisticated team that's producing podcasts. For an individual, use the free app, get used to it. Have your first one and your second one, your third one. They're going to suck. They're not going to be great. You'll get better. You'll get more comfortable. You'll listen to them. Like, go listen to my very first podcast. You'll be like, what the hell, dude? And I'm episode 275, and no one is like, yeah, but episodes 3 sucked. Not listening anymore, right? It's okay. Just like anything in the world, learn the technology, experiment, have your failures, learn your lessons, benefit from it, get better. Ask your audience for feedback. Ask trusted people. Ask people, your friends, your family, people that don't listen to podcasts. Be like, sit down and listen to this, and then tell me if it makes any sense to you. You know, back to what you're saying about if they're listening to it on the farm, then if they get it on the farm, they're going to get it anywhere else. But if your most sophisticated friend, who is the most savvy person on the planet, goes, I don't get it, you're missing the mark. So it's a combination of all the things. But don't focus on, I'm not ready, but get started, make your mistakes, learn your lessons, and then kind of advance through the process.
Great advice.